OverClocked Remix, for anyone who has not heard of it, is a website dedicated to the remixing and reinterpretation of video game soundtracks. Originally created by David W. Lloyd, alias DJ Pretzel, in 1999, the website quickly evolved to become a community hub, where anyone is welcome to submit their music to a slowly evolving panel of judges who review and select any submission that represents a high bar of quality in musical reinterpretation. They have now officially posted over 4,000 remix songs on their website, almost all of which are available to download for free and cover every video game genre and platform imaginable. Alongside the regular mix posts, since 2003, they have been sponsoring full remix albums that take a video game, a series or a genre soundtrack and collate them to fully produced, free, fan-made releases. The second of these remix albums, Kong in Concert, was released in autumn 2004, and it was dedicated to the soundtrack of the 1994 SNES game Donkey Kong Country, a game revered at that time for combining cutting-edge graphics and a soundtrack full of melody with fast-paced, highly intricate gameplay. Most of these compositions were by David Wise, but with some additional tracks from Robin Beanland and Evelyn Fisher, this unique collaboration produced a soundtrack that fit the perfect balance between ambience and melody. Donkey Kong Country was marketed on the pre-rendered, cutting-edge for the age, quasi-3D graphics that make this 2D platformer pop, but players found that after the initial shock of the rendered sprites had worn off, the funky jungle swing had them coming back for more. The Donkey Kong Country soundtrack was one of the first video game soundtracks to receive worldwide, separate commercial releases. There would be 2 immediate sequels on the SNES, and David Wise would take the opportunity in the sequel to build on the melodies established in this first game, to flesh them out even further, so that when the Donkey Kong Country series returned in 2010, these themes were still resonating with gamers right the way through to the 8th console generation. A decade after the original game came out, in April 2004, a collection of artists assembled on the OverClocked Remix website agreed to tackle the soundtrack as a remix album. Led by Digital Coma, real name Binny Cutty, who originally believed this would just be a small summer side project, a team of remix artists came together and ended up producing a surprisingly large hit, one that would become the second official remix album under the OC Remix banner. The target was to produce a single replacement for each and every one of the songs on the original David Wise soundtrack. Digital Coma put out a call for arrangers to revive, reinterpret and rearrange this work in order to reawaken the nostalgia for our landmark video game, only a decade old at that point. There were whispers about this on the site forums, interest from several key musicians, with discussion on the IRC channel ongoing. The team of arrangers, once assembled, were offered the choice of any track from the game soundtrack they wished regardless, with multiple artists competing for some tracks. Challenged with creating something that would be both original but a satisfying homage to David Wise's masterpiece, the team were given the summer to work on these tracks, and the album would eventually release on the 12th of September that year, a turnaround time of less than 6 months for more than 22 tracks to be produced and then whittled down. The album name, Kong in Concert, was also settled on in committee and was agreed to be an identifiable, appropriate and approachable title, far improved over some of the other suggestions, which included Gorilla Con Gusto. Once all the arrangements were complete, peer review of these overlapping tracks was carried out, with 2 of the most sought after tracks, the title theme and the credits concerto, being run by Israfel and Protricity respectively. These tracks top and tail the album, and they represent the scope of the team well, bringing depth and a variety to the soundtrack that had both heart and melody, but was perhaps lacking in variety of scope. For much of its runtime, the opening track, Godiva of the Desert, emphasises the backing tune rather than the main motif of the DK theme song, something several of these remixes do, to the point where many listeners may not immediately recognise their source material. Whether that is a problem will depend on the purpose of the listener. From the 22 listed songs, which are on 21 separate tracks, a small selection would then be promoted to the core OverClocked Remix playlist. At the time there were just over 400 officially endorsed tracks on the website, although this was quickly growing with regular additions as the judges panel took submissions from every musical genre imaginable. The album's full release was accompanied by 3 songs specifically chosen to be added to the OC Remix archive for posterity as full mix posts. The most obvious of these tracks was JJT's take on the iconic DK Island Swing, the very song that probably first hooks players into the funky, fast-paced momentum platformer that the game was offering. It, along with Aquatic Ambience, are many people's favourite tracks from the soundtrack, and so it was vital that they got this one right. John took a mellow, jazzy approach, feeling no pressure to rush into the melody, but allowed himself a few moments to really feel the groove. The track is cool, there is no doubt, combining a Rhodes piano with a funky trumpet, but some purists will decry the loss of the up-tempo swing from the original song. When the trumpet does come into the main melody, it's an excellent reinterpretation of the original, but this moment is all too brief and short to properly pay off the delayed prelude. However, this was accompanied by one of the other fan favourite tracks, which was reinterpreted by Vigilante, real name Jesse Tal, who produced a mix of the classic underwater theme Aquatic Ambience, titled Beneath the Surface. The original track, which was limited by the SNES sound chip, had hinted at an immersive, atmospheric, relaxing experience that was perfectly suited to be expanded with full rock drums, ambient pads, a smooth bass, and escalating pianos. There were cameos from other game themes. For me, the Metroid motifs stood out a little to me, and they are a little jarring for those who recognise them, but honestly, they do fit within the song perfectly. The third of these selected representative tracks was a remix of the song Fear Factory, now retitled Machina Anasthesia. The original theme was accompanied by a rapid pulsing beeping backing tune. Grey Alexander, under the artist name Grey Lightning, removed that in order to slow the track right down, allowing the front melody to take centre stage and give it room to breathe. Dropping the fast pace allows the incorporation of some Asian influences to give it a cinematic scope, and this would not feel out of place in a movie soundtrack. This percussion-driven style flips between ambient melody and a military marching motif, providing a track both tense but engrossing. This makes the track perhaps a little more divisive than some of the other tracks, but even its detractors recognise some incredibly high moments of inspired artistry amongst the cacophony of noise. A few months later, Elizabeth Ryerson, under the alias Adhesive Boy at the time, had her rendition of the Cave Dweller theme added to the OC Remix site list. Cry of the Chasmal Critter chain takes what was originally a very fragmented, sound effect heavy track and produced something that builds a unique, ominous yet with a quiet intensity that benefits from real instrumentation. A xylophone picks up many of the sound effects from the original, and this inspired choice lets the wooden instrument bounce off unorthodox yet striking combinations of piano or string instruments to produce a pretty cool sound. The next song from the album to be promoted to the OC main website was from Andreas Kosaminidis, better known as Snappleman, who has gained a reputation for featuring on many OC Remix albums with heavy-hitting guitars. The Gangpank Galleon track was an excellent choice for him to wade into, producing a very clean metal track that is a perfect counterpoint to the more relaxed ambient approach the album had favoured until this point. David Wise has said that the original track was inspired by listening to Iron Maiden, so it is great to hear the song come full circle and embrace its metal heritage, though on the album it has a short piano prelude by David Sue that offers a completely different interpretation of the source material. Thrash the Plank is the penultimate track of the album, and it brings the album into a rocketing high before Rare Reminiscence would use its electro beat to calm things down again without actually having to slow up the tempo. A month later, these tracks would be joined by Rob Townsend, alias Aetherius, song Clouded Mind and Ringing Ears, the last mix post release of 2004. This song combines ambient sounds with industrial percussion to create a soundscape that can be captivating for those prepared to fully immerse themselves within, but one that sorely lacks any form of melody whatsoever. It did serve two important roles, elevating some very bland source material and also highlighting the variety of music in the album as a whole. An abbreviated form of Chekan Winter, which was included in the album by the artist Prophecy, real name Jason Miller, was then pushed onto the main OC Remix site in February 2005. The song's title comes from the Soviet secret police, as his take on the Northern Hemisphere music, and the original has a Slavic influence that is inescapable. The song has been changed completely to become something that evokes imagery of running through a chaotic snowstorm, with eerie choir music and church bells to really sell that gothic vibe. The last song to receive a site post was the Valentine edit of Funky Monkey Love, which was a collaboration between Vig, Jesse Taub again, and Lion Tamer, Larry Oji, one of the main OC Remix administrators. This is a weird song,
which tries to inject some comedy from some absurd lyrics, a template that will be familiar to anyone who's listened to Tenacious D.
Jesse's clean vocals sell this as a soft funk organ track that is completely inoffensive if you ignore the lyrics. However, this changes 3/4 of the way through when Larry steps in with deep, aggressive, soulful, Play Daddy impersonation that stays just the right side of camp. This song is ridiculous to the extreme, but it doesn't outstay its welcome and is professionally cut together.
When Diddy's not around, then he hops on Funky's flights and hightails out of town. Let me hit you up with some of that monkey love. Come here, girl.
The selection posted to the main OverClocked Remix website are just a couple of songs, 8 out of 22, that represent the scope and range of the album. However, this would turn out to be a very high hit rate for OC Remix albums, as it would be difficult to coordinate the required high bar of excellence that every track on a single concept album requires. Tracks that don't make the crossing are no worse, perhaps notable in that they tend to follow a more obvious interpretation of the source material, but I believe that the OC Remix judges chose well in their selection this time. The Kong in Concert album would bring OverClocked Remix a lot of media coverage and bandwidth, and was picked up by the news aggregator site Slashdot, which shared the torrent to a mass new audience for the site, giving them over 10,000 downloads for the first time. This album successfully traversed several different genres of music, and yet it never let itself feel disjointed. Instead, it is almost as though Donkey and Diddy Kong embarked on a world tour to experience different cultural styles, taking DK out of the jungle, letting that funky melody try some new vibes, was a brilliant success, and this album would set itself up as a figurehead for many more albums which followed in its wake. These are soundtracks that you could easily play the game to, but you could just as equally listen to whilst jogging, or working, or eating a meal. I've done all three and had positive comments from family who particularly enjoyed this album as a high point for my eclectic music collection. OverClocked Remix would then release 3 further albums in 2005 and another 47 over the following decade, collaborating with Capcom to get their music in an official Street Fighter release and negotiating with Square Enix for permission for their official Kickstarter album to physically release the Final Fantasy VI reinterpretation. It feels as though none of that would have been possible without the early album releases demonstrating that collaborative, high-concept remix albums were not just possible, they could be fantastic.